With us today is Tom Gross, Middle East expert, journalist, commentator, analyst, a renowned figure in the topics that we talk about here on Middle East Broadcasting and Al-Hurra. Tom, good to talk to you.
Nice to be with you. Hello.
In the ever-changing world of Middle East, Israel's relations with its neighbors and everything, it's hard to keep up sometimes. You think back in January, Prime Minister Netanyahu was the first foreign visitor to meet newly inaugurated President Trump in Washington, D.C. Things seem to be on course. Things have changed. Much has changed. It's been quite a 6 months, the fall of the Assad regime, a new president. We have so much going on. So I just want to start by asking, how do you feel that Israel's relations with the US have evolved, or what's going on in the past months? Because some things, President Trump just visited the Middle East and he didn't stop by in Israel. So it would be interesting to know your perspective on how this is evolving after that initial visit.
Yes, well, Donald Trump has said that he's the most pro-Israel, supportive president ever of Israel. And in some ways that's true. But what's also true of Donald Trump is that he can be inconsistent, that he can change his mind, or at least appear to change his mind. It's also true that he's very much, as he would phrase it, an America First president, and that means America. And although America, Israel and the United States often share the same policy goals and strategic interests, that's not always the case. So there has been a little bit of tension, at least apparently, between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government. But then, Trump has tension with almost everybody, especially if you look at other democracies in Europe or Canada. Trump's been far more brusque and unfriendly towards them than he's ever been towards Israel. So the fact that Trump and Netanyahu occasionally disagree or have little tiffs, I wouldn't read too much into it. I'd say the relationship between Israel and the United States is still very solid.
So what do you think, what's behind some of the changes and what is evolving? Is there something specific that either the US did or Israel did that you feel has kind of caused a bit of a shift, if only temporary?
Well, yes, there are a couple of things. So first of all, somebody asked me today, what is Trump's foreign policy? Is there a Trump doctrine? And having thought about it, I said, the only policy I can see is that he's a deal maker, just as he was during his business career. So he likes making deals, even if those deals aren't necessarily good ones. For example, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, he's very eager to reach an agreement, and that agreement may not be a good agreement. Likewise, when it comes to an Israel-Hamas Gaza ceasefire, Trump is eager to end the conflict. And of course, everybody wants to end this conflict, but the question is, will Trump end the conflict or urge Israel to end the conflict in a way that will be in Western and Israeli strategic interests, rather than a de facto victory for Hamas, allowing Hamas to rebuild its strength? And then a couple of other points of possible contention. Trump, of course, is a businessman. He thinks in economic terms and transactional terms. So you're right. He went on his first proper foreign trip to 3 Gulf nations. He went to Saudi Arabia, then Qatar, then the United Arab Emirates. He had made a small visit for the Pope's funeral in the Vatican, but his first proper trip was to the Gulf. And when he came into power on his first term, he went to Saudi Arabia, and then he flew from Saudi Arabia to Israel. If my memory serves me, it was the first ever publicly declared flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel of any kind. And he gave a very nice speech to Israelis at the rather beautiful Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This time round, he's not visited Israel, but as you pointed out, Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think, has been 3 times already to the White House, which is more than any other foreign leader, as far as I'm aware. And also they speak by phone regularly. And in fact, Trump phoned Netanyahu twice from the Gulf, from Qatar and from Riyadh. And Secretary of State Rubio also phoned Netanyahu during that trip. So I think Trump may not be visiting Israel, but the Israelis are being kept in the loop when Trump visits Qatar and Riyadh. But just to conclude that point, clearly most of that trip was a transactional trip for business investments, either by those states into the US, or it is rumored for business investments down the line in the Trump organization with private businesses. So again, I wouldn't read in too much the fact that Trump did not visit Israel on this particular trip or tour.
So not an intentional snub.
No, look, he's a busy man. He's almost 80 years old. He had a whirlwind tour of 3 different countries. Turkey was also disappointed as a NATO ally. They didn't stop in Turkey. Egypt was the biggest Arab country last time round, or maybe not last time, but if you remember, President Obama on his first foreign trip gave a big address to what he called the Muslim world, whatever that means. And he gave an address in a university in Cairo. So, Egypt, Turkey, other countries may also feel left out. I really wouldn't read too much in there. Israel and the United States are on the same page, except for one issue that we haven't yet come to, which is the Iranian nuclear talks.
So before we get to that, I do want to ask, do you feel separate from Trump's policies toward Israel, however they may be evolving or whatever, do you feel that there's a change in President Trump's policies toward Middle East, toward Middle Eastern countries, that is changing, and has it changed since the first term?
Well, I'd start by saying more generally, I think the second Trump term is going to be very different than the first term. In the first term, he had less experience in politics. He did not, I don't think he won the popular vote like he did against this time. He didn't win it against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Or 2015, was it? He didn't have such a grip on the Republican Party and didn't have such a grip on Congress. So if I recall, in his previous term, he had to appoint a chief of staff that the Republican Party establishment imposed on Trump. I can't remember his name, Priebus, I think it was. Whereas this time round, it's very much a Trump presidency. Trump knows he only has 1 term in office now, and he really only has 2 years before the midterm. So he's moving at incredible speed since he came into office in late January, in general, on everything, on tariffs, on China, on many, many issues. He's shooting all over the place, sometimes seriously, sometimes less so, about, incorporating Canada into America, getting the Panama Canal, turning Gaza into Riviera. So I think we have to look at that, or moving to some Ukraine, Russia, end of war. So I think we have to look at his attitude to the Arab world and the Gulf in that context. I'm not sure he's made so many changes towards the Arab world compared to the changes towards Europe, for example, threatening them with tariffs and pull out, or prematurely forcing a peace treaty on Ukraine that Europeans and Ukrainians might be less than happy with. So I think with the Gulf that, Trump did enjoy good relations with most of the Arab world and the Gulf Arabs already in his first term. He did, of course, establish the Abraham Accords, which is probably his biggest foreign policy achievement. I'm sure everyone listening to this knows what the Abraham Accords was, but just to remind people, before the Abraham Accords, Israel had only had formal relations with 2 Arab countries, Egypt and Jordan, and Trump added 3 or possibly 4 countries in one swoop, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Morocco, to a lesser extent Sudan. And the agreements, the treaties with UAE in Israel and Morocco in Israel are very, very successful. They're quite warm relations. For example, in the current Gaza war, Emirates has continued flying, and Fly Dubai have flown every day once or more than once to Tel Aviv, whereas some European airlines have not always flown. Morocco, for example, has increased its relations with Israel during the last 2 years at a time when various European countries are being very critical of Israel. So Trump always wanted to expand on these Abraham Accords. In his recent visit to the Gulf, he mentioned publicly his desire both for Saudi Arabia and for the new Syrian government to join the Abraham Accords and normalize relations with Israel. And I'm sure it's definitely, I mean, he said it's as much, his foreign policy agenda may be one of the main ones in the world, apart from dealing with China. I'd say the main one is to expand the Abraham Accords. And if circumstances are right, I don't see why pretty much the entire Arab world, all 22 Arab states, including Syria and Lebanon, would join the Abraham Accords under Trump, but certainly a number of other countries would. So yes, Trump wants to keep good relations with the Gulf in order to achieve this, which would be a really historical achievement and cement his place in history and maybe get him a Nobel Peace Prize.
I just read speculation today that Azerbaijan might also be one of the next countries to join the Abraham Accords.
Well, Azerbaijan and Israel already have relations. They have embassies. In fact, I know an Israeli diplomat who works in Baku. So I'm not sure that Azerbaijan has to, but there may be other countries in Central Asia or Indonesia. It's not only limited to the Arab world. There may be, Indonesia, which is the most populous Muslim country. There's talk about it, possibly even Malaysia, which has been quite hostile to Israel. So certainly it's not only about the Arab states, but the big prizes would be Saudi Arabia and Syria. And I think if Syria joins the Abraham Accords, unless Hezbollah and Iran manage to stop Lebanon, I presume that Lebanon will too.
Thank you. And now, of course, we have this looming issue that's at the back of everyone's mind of Iran. And I'd like to chat with you briefly about that. Iran is obviously something that's always of concern to Israel, and the issue of ongoing Iranian threats to Israel and its proxies fighting in the proximity of Israel. So I'd like to talk to you about that and speculation, of course, in recent times, that Israel may be preparing to take out Iranian nuclear facilities. So just in a general sense, and also to put into context, one of the questions I would ask is, why now? Because the Iranian nuclear program has been in development for a long time. And if something were to happen, why would this happen now of all times?
Okay, well, there are various ways of looking at it, but let's start with one of them. The terror attacks on October 7th, 2023, on southern Israel by Hamas were correctly viewed as, in a way, an Iranian attack on Israel. Hamas, although they get some direct funding from Qatar, Iran is really their spiritual employer, or however, I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but anyway, it's, the Iranians gave a lot of training to Hamas. One of the Hamas leaders, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated by Israel in Tehran during this war last year, 2024. And Hezbollah too, remember, started firing thousands of rockets at Israel one day later, October 8th, 2023. So both Hezbollah and Hamas, and also the Houthis in in Yemen, all three of them are part of the same kind of Iranian axis. All three of them have fired thousands, tens of thousands of rockets at Israel, which is a very small state geographically. It's a tiny territory. Iran too has fired missiles on 2 or 3 different occasions last year at Israel. So Israel feels itself to be under a prolonged attack from all sides, and it's only because Israel has managed to invent really quite miraculous missile defense systems, the Iron Dome and the Arrow missile defense system, that very few of these rockets have caused big fatalities in Israel. But these rockets are huge. The rockets that the Houthis have been firing, one of which recently hit Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's main civilian airport, earlier in May. That rocket got through Israel's missile defense, and that's a ballistic missile that Iran has supplied to the Houthis. And I understand a missile like that could be, you could have a nuclear warhead on such a missile. So the threats by Iran, the regime, I should say, rather than Iran, the Islamic regime, is constantly screaming and shouting and organizing rallies, shouting death to America, death to Israel. Israel has to take these threats seriously. They can't just dismiss them as rhetoric. The Iranian regime has armed, it's moved to Israel's borders. It's attempting to do so in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza. It's attempting to do so in the West Bank. So that's one reason Israel is very concerned about Iranian threats. And although it's managed to withhold the threat so far with a relatively small number of Israeli casualties or property damage, a nuclear threat will be altogether different, obviously, even though it is rumored that Israel has its own nuclear arsenal and could respond. Again, the territory of Israel is very small, and there's a kind of messianic, if I can use a kind of Christian term, attitudes of some of the Shia clerics in the Islamic regime in Iran, where they may be prepared to sacrifice, to accept retaliatory action from Israel in order to wipe out Israel. Israel's a very small landmass. Half of it is the Negev desert. Quite a small device is an existential threat to the existence of Israel.
Thank you. That was an excellent outlining of the threats. Yeah. I guess then the question is of the timing, because they didn't do this a year ago or any other time. Why now?
Well, Iran has been, the Islamic regime in Iran has been working on a nuclear weapons program for about 20 years, probably more, in fact. And Israel, sometimes in line with the United States and also with the assistance of certain European intelligence agencies, which I won't name on this broadcast, but just to clarify, it's not only Israel and America, there are some European countries involved too. They have taken various measures to slow down or thwart the Iranian nuclear program, some of which were very successful, like the Stuxnet virus in 2009, that essentially was a computer virus that disabled a lot of the centrifuges of the Iranian nuclear program. And as I understand, this virus, it wasn't just a virus sent via computer. Somebody went in with a little stick and stuck it into the system on one of the nuclear sites. So it involved human involvement inside Iran too. Israel is also alleged, although it's never admitted to doing so, having assassinated some nuclear scientists inside Iran, motorbike assassins, very targeted killings, and it's taken other measures too to thwart and slow down the Iranian nuclear program. Now, it has managed to slow down and thwart the program, but it has not managed to stop it because Iran has continued enriching uranium. And again, I'm not an expert on the scientific side of things, but the international agencies themselves said the Islamic regime is very, very close to being able to manufacture nuclear weapons. Weeks, months. So the window is closing. I know we've heard this before, but it really is closing this time. That's one reason. And other things have been tried. Barack Obama did a nuclear deal. There have been sanctions. There have been all kinds of other measures to try and slow down the program, but they've only slowed it down. They haven't stopped it. There's another factor, which is that one of the deterrents Iran always has had was things like its proxy militia in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Hezbollah had around 100,000 rockets, and they were threatening Israel that if Israel would do something, they would rain down rockets. And the Hezbollah rockets were quite strong. Now, Israel has essentially significantly degraded Hezbollah. As people will recall, they planted a virus in the beepers, in walkie-talkies and so on, and they disabled the entire infrastructural network of Hezbollah. They assassinated the Hezbollah leader, Nasrallah. I'm not saying Israel did this, but the regime in Syria has fallen. The new government in Syria, even though it has Islamist roots, is already being fairly friendly towards Israel, or making it, let's say, it's blocking the rearmament of Hezbollah across its territory by Iran. They are cooperating in that respect. The new Syrian government's cooperating with the West to prevent Iran interfering or reactivating Hezbollah. Also last year, after Iran attempted to hit Israel with missiles, Israel hit back at various defensive capabilities inside Iran. And Iran hasn't yet rebuilt them. So right now, Iran is the Iranian nuclear sites are more vulnerable than they were 6 or 12 months ago, because Israel has disabled a lot of their defensive possibilities. And at some point, Iran will rebuild these capabilities. So there's a window of opportunity. There's another point, which is maybe the more contentious point from Israel, or the more complicated point, and that is Donald Trump. As I said before, he likes making deals. He likes saying, look at me, deal of the century, Art of the Deal, his book, Art of the Deal. And there's a fear in Israel that the United States, which is currently negotiating with the Islamic regime in Tehran about its nuclear program, may make a deal which is not a good deal. It's maybe similar to the deal that Barack Obama made with slight modifications, but it's not a deal that will prevent a nuclear bomb down the road. It's a deal that will just allow the regime to buy time. And now this puts Israel in a fantastic dilemma if Trump does that, because the question is, Israel is literally gambling with its existence to rely on that deal working. You know, Trump's only going to be in power for another 3 years. Whoever comes next, even J.D. Vance, may be a very different president than Trump. And, to state the obvious, as everybody knows, the Jewish people suffered a Holocaust within living memory. There's still Holocaust survivors alive that almost wiped out the Jewish people. And as the Israeli Prime Minister said, Israel needs to take seriously threats to wipe it out. It's not just rhetoric. So the question is, would Israel defy Trump if Trump has signed a deal with the Iranians and say, job done? The only deal that Israel will really be satisfied with is a kind of deal of the kind Libya did 15 years ago under Gaddafi, where you remove the enriched uranium from Iranian territory. And it is possible, there's talk that it could go to Russia, for example. They could store it in Russia. They would have to actually remove the enriched uranium. And short of that, people say, well, the United States, Israel will never dare to defy Donald Trump. You don't know how he'll react. But, in the past, Israel has twice hit nuclear programs, which of course were at a much earlier stage. One was under Saddam Hussein in 1981, the Osirak bombings. The Israelis did air raids on that, and they destroyed that program, although it was logistically much easier to do. It was at a much earlier stage. It wasn't buried underground like it is in Iran. But to remind people, Ronald Reagan, who was quite pro-Israel, slapped sanctions on Israel with Jeane Kirkpatrick after Osirak. And then the second one was in 2006 or 7, when George W. Bush was president, when Prime Minister Ehud Olmert hit the Syrian nuclear program. And again, the Bush administration was against it. So Israel's twice done it, and afterwards, the Americans years later thanked Israel. They were like, thank heavens that Saddam Hussein or Assad did not manage to get nuclear weapons.
And we know Israel is prepared to strike. Last year, there were the sort of the Operation Days of Repentance Israeli airstrikes on Iran following the Iranian strikes on Israel. And of course, we know even now, most recently on May 6th, the Israelis took out Sana'a airport in Yemen, and because of the Houthis, and also on the 16th, I believe, struck 3 ports as well. So it's clear that Israel is ready.
And not just that, the distances, because it's a long distance to fly from Israel to Yemen, but that kind of distance is not that different than the distance to Iran. But look, again, it's not that the Israeli Air Force is one of the best in the world. The pilots are very, very experienced now, having been fighting against Hezbollah and Houthis, as you just mentioned. But it's a question of the 2 things: whether Israel has strong enough bombs to get the underground sites in Iran. It's much more complicated. Iran, of course, is a huge geographic country. It's a complicated thing for Israel to do. The secondary thing is how Iran would react. So they can no longer react with Hezbollah and Hamas. They've already used that card. Even with the Houthis, they're already using that card now. But they might react by striking American bases in the Gulf. And that's one reason the Americans might be angry, and it complicates it. It's a very, very difficult and complicated decision. And of course, no one in Israel wants to do this. They'd much rather the Iranians agreed to a good, solid working deal with the United States. I might go further and say most people in Israel, just like probably most people in Iran, would love the regime to give up power, because of course, if there was a different kind of government in Iran, there wouldn't be that threat. It's not Iran that's a threat. It's specifically the Islamic regime in Iran that's a threat, not just to Israel, but to much of the Arab world and to many other countries.
I'd like to conclude by just touching a bit on something that I think has struck everyone about President Trump's most recent visit, and just to delve a bit more deeply for a moment into Qatar, because there's a lot there to look at, the sums of money that we're talking about, and how that the sort of the rapprochement, whatever you want to call it, kind of closer relations between the US and Qatar. What are in your view, the ramifications of that? What is the significance of that for all of us in that region?
Yeah, I think it's very, very disturbing, and I think we should all be very unhappy. Qatar, it's rumored to have helped fund ISIS, to have helped fund the Taliban. Even now, it plays a double game with Hamas. It is a hard, it is a dangerous regime. This 400 million plane that they're supposedly going to gift Trump, I mean, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but there's certainly no such thing as a free $400 million plane. And Qatar already funds a lot of radicalism in American universities. It's bought up all kinds of valuable properties in London and Paris. It literally bought the World Cup through bribery. It is not, none of the governments in the Middle East are perfect, but, overall, the Saudi government, the new Syrian government to date, are responsible governments that are trying to moderate and trying to be, behave in a responsible way. There are obviously problems, but also the UAE is a responsible government. Qatar, far from it. Qatar is a rogue actor because it's a tiny state with only 200,000 or 300,000 citizens. Everyone else there is a guest worker. They have a lot of cash at hand because they don't have many people to feed. So I think Qatar is a great worry. Yes.
And I have to ask, I mean, so the budget of Al Jazeera is estimated to be between 600 million and $1 billion a year. And we know that they have platformed a lot of very extremist viewpoints. How do you think that squares with sort of US foreign policy, or anyone sort of having stronger relations with Qatar, even at the same time as as their state is funding something that is virulently opposed to a lot of the values of the countries that are having these relations with it.
It's not just opposed. Al Jazeera cameramen have literally helped fire rockets at Israel from Gaza. I mean, they are absolutely in collusion with a recognized terrorist group. It's not for nothing that when there was a ceasefire and there were these hostage release ceremonies, that all stage managed with rather nice graphics. On the one hand, Hamas are claiming there's no electricity and no fuel, and the next moment they've got all these nice screens and computer graphics, and they're putting on stage shows when they released Israeli hostages. But Al Jazeera was invited in collusion with with Hamas, to film and be the propaganda arm of Hamas. And, the International Red Cross has not managed to see hostages, but just recently, Qatar did a report from the so-called terror tunnels in Gaza. In other words, Qatar and Hamas are like that. And Qatar, a real problem. I think it's very disappointing and worrying how many institutions in Europe and North America have been essentially bought off in a very strategic way by the Qataris, who obviously have very good advisors. Because, as I was mentioning, the Saudis also have a lot of money from oil and gas, but they have 30 million people to look after as a population. The Qataris, with their small population, are cash happy. They have also been some of the worst sort of anti-American attitudes in Ivy League universities, not just on the Middle East, but just general anti-American radicalism has been funded by Qatar. And, they've bought off various politicians who are literally on their payroll. I think I read the other day that one of the possible contenders for the French presidency at the next election is literally on the payroll of Qatar. They bought off various think tanks, by funding, I think, Brookings. I'm not quite sure which ones, but some of the important think tanks in Washington, D.C., they got a lot of cash happy. They bought off FIFA, the World Cup. They play all sides. And, there's a danger that Donald Trump is also dazzled by their money, dazzled by the potential investment. Steve Witkoff, who is his chief negotiator, both on Israel-Hamas and on Iran and on Russia-Ukraine, he is a self-made billionaire who has business interests in Qatar. The Qataris have some joint ventures in either New York or Miami with Steve Witkoff. This is a very unsatisfactory situation where the Qatari regime are a real problem, and they need to be forced to moderate or need to be forced to come on board. I don't know enough about their motivations behind all this, but yes, they're a huge problem.
Tom Gross, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
That was an interview with Tom Gross, renowned Middle East expert, analyst, commentator, journalist, about what's going on in the Middle East today, how President Trump's most recent visit to the Middle East might be changing what's going on for the entire region, and the possible attacks that Israel might make on Iranian nuclear facilities, and lots more. Thank you for watching.